Hi, I'm Karen Hurd, and I'm here with our next edition of Asking for a Friend Live. And I know we are talking about a topic today that is hot on your minds. How do you measure the impact of in-person work versus virtual or hybrid teams? How do you measure the ROI? So I reached out to Jack Phillips, who is the absolute expert in measuring ROI. And he has written a number of books. He's been at this for a very long time and really understands the process and methodology of measuring the impact of what you do. So, Jack, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Karen. Glad to be with you. Thank you.
So before we dive in, and as we invite our listeners to think about their questions about ROI, I want to ask you just to share a little bit about the work that you do and some of the books that you've written in partnership with SHRM and ATD.
And others, yes.
Yes.
So we have a company called ROI Institute, and we help people see the value of what they do, see and show the value of what they do. We'll do it for them, we'll do it with them, or we teach them to do it. So we work in many different areas in HR, quality, technology, marketing, all kinds of organizations. Started off with business about 25 years ago. We now work with a lot of NGOs, governments, and nonprofits, and charitable organizations, and so forth. Today, we're talking about something that probably hits this issue, human capital strategy, that the Chief Human Resource Officer is in a jam here with the work at home issue. And we know that ROI is an interesting issue. It's keen for a lot of decision makers. And this is a book just published, a McGraw-Hill book on ROI marketing. We work in the marketing area. So ROI just captures attention because it shows you, hey, this is what it's costing us, and this is the monetary value we get from that. And you put those together, you got ROI as a calculation. Or in governments, we call it benefit cost analysis. So you've got a number there. Now, today we're thinking about working at home and how do we make that work and how do we measure the success? We'd like to offer you a case study that comes from an article I think that Karen read. The case study is published by SHRM in this book, Proving the Value of HR. It's a book about how an insurance company decided to let two particular job groups work at home. I mean, they had 1,000 people in these two job groups. These were claims processors and claims examiners. And they're willing to let all of them work at home. Well, that's a big switch. This is before the pandemic. And so we tracked that case study. We'll talk about that a little bit as we go through the process.
Excellent. So thank you so much. So here's the thing. This is the call I'm having pretty much every day with one of my clients. So we had to pivot everybody to virtual teams, working from home, working remotely. We did not have a choice. Now we are starting to have a choice. How do we know what is better for the company and what is better for the employees? And how do we actually measure that impact? So that's really what we're here to talk about today. So I'd love to start with, what are some of the key components that when you're thinking about ROI, and somebody's just beginning to do this assessment, what are the key areas they should be looking at?
So think about a value chain that goes with any project or any program we have, a value chain of data. And it starts with reaction. How do people see this? So imagine working at home. How do the employees see this? How do their managers see this? See, that's two important perspectives.
Yep.
How are they reacting to it? Is it something that is feasible? It's possible. It's important to them. It's something that they're willing to make successful. See, we start with reaction. We got to have that right. And it's two critical people, and that's the employee and the immediate manager.
Okay, so when you say reaction data, you're talking about like employee survey data, right?
Yes.
What is the feeling that's happening? So that's a good place to start. Okay.
Yes. All right. Now we measure learning. Do you know how to do it? Two sets of learning here. One is learning the rules for working at home. Whatever the company has, there's some rules in place normally. Got to know that. Okay. But also, how do you work remotely? That's a lot of learning there. And that's where we went into chaos here, and we didn't know how to do it so well. But the managers also they have to learn to work with the policy, work with the rules, but also know how to manage remotely. So that's learning. So you got reaction and learning. Those two
Okay,
go
so Jen,
together.
let me just stop you there, because somebody has said, all right, that sounds great. I'd love to measure my learning. But how do you do that? How do you know whether people are picking up what you're putting down and then what you're teaching?
It could be self-assessment that you say, what's your capability of this? Or it could be that you give them some kind of quiz if it's knowledge.
Okay.
Or we have someone observe to see if it's a skill that they need. So there are ways to measure it, and you can spend as much time or effort that you want to. Sometimes just self-assessment surveys taken anonymously, confidential at least, will get us the data we need. So that's learning, but that's not it yet. We've got to go look at, is it working? We call that application, applying what they've learned. Is it working? Are you following the guidelines? Are you effective at your work? You're getting the work done. And from a manager perspective, are we following the process? Are we managing remotely? See, that's the key thing. Is it working for us now? Is it working the way we want it to? See, that's still not impact yet. So, but that's important. That's what leads us to the impact.
Okay.
We're
All right, so
building
you've got your foundation. So you've got how are employees and managers feeling about it? What are they learning? Do they know how to do it? And then are they actually executing on the processes and that you've laid out? So that's sort of the foundation of the ROI.
That's the foundation. That's necessary to get to where we need to be, and that's impact.
Okay.
So what impact? So we've got two sets of impacts from the company perspective. One of those is what we call tangibles. Those are the measures that we can usually convert to money easily. One is that, hey, we're saving office expense. That's a huge one if you're giving up the job completely. Second, retention. And both of those are quite expensive. If we have turnover of talent is very expensive. We know how to get to the money on that. It's easy. And then there's productivity. We've already seen some studies saying productivity increased during the pandemic by 5%. I'm curious to how someone knows that. Actually, that's usually more specific to the organization. But in our own studies, we've seen productivity increase. And I think there's three reasons for that. And one is you've got less distractions, maybe.
Yeah.
And I see in a good work environment at home, you try to minimize those distractions. At work, you got everyone popping in and talking to you and interrupting you. And also, you don't have that stress that you had on that long drive coming in that you've got to decompress for a while and get into this mindset. And third, and I think that's the most critical one is happening, is that people want to keep this as an option. So they're working a little harder. I think we all work harder. We get more done.
Yeah.
So that's a plus there. That's not a good thing necessarily, but that adds to the productivity. So productivity. So we've got office expense, retention, productivity. We also have maybe absenteeism, unplanned absenteeism will decrease. Sick time days or sick days will decrease. And you might have some other measures depending on the kind of business you're going, but those are the big ones for tangible. But then you have the intangible. Hey, my job satisfaction's increased. My work-life balance has improved. My stress is down. It's convenient for me. Hey, and I'm saving money. I don't have that commute and that parking and that lunch at that, all of that stuff. Hey, this is good for me. See, that perspective, that's from the employee perspective. And this is a good thing. So we're thinking about ROI from the company perspective, but this is the ROI from the employee perspective. Hey, it's working for them. So let's don't lose that. We're going to connect our program to that. See, by definition, we're not converting it to money because we say the effort to convert that to money is probably cost more time and effort than we're willing to spend. It may not be that credible anyway. So let's leave it as an intangible, still important, but we got to connect this to our project.
Okay. So interestingly, so I'm really curious. And I want to go to some of David's questions here. have all of your studies that you've done on ROI of this proven that remote work is higher ROI than in-person work, or are you finding a mix?
Well, so far they're all positive.
Interesting.
Some are more positive than others. Even in governments, we've done studies with the Internal Revenue Service, for example, where the case managers work remotely. They didn't give up the office space, and that's your big opportunity for money.
Yeah.
But they still got more productivity, more than enough to cover the cost of that for the agency to implement. See, the cost for implementing this is quite low because you've got to make sure that people know and they're trained and they've learned. You got to support them in some way. So you do have some cost here, but that's pretty minimal. But you've got so many opportunities for cost savings here. So you'd expect a positive ROI and a huge ROI if you give up all that expensive office space.
Yeah. So I'm really curious because, of course, the thing that so many folks are worried about, because there's a lot of extroverts who say, yeah, I really thrive on those interruptions. I need to be in the room with my team. So do you find that there are, what are the downsides? Are your ROI studies showing any downsides in terms of maybe innovation or mental health for those folks who feel isolated? Maybe they don't have a family at home. Are you seeing some of that? And do you have a way to tap in to measure some of that?
Yes, always. And so we know those in advance, and we try to anticipate those and work with them. Here's the ones that can spell trouble for us. One is teamwork can go down.
Yeah.
Collaboration can go down. Engagement can go down. Mental health issues because of isolation can increase. Plus, you can have career issues. A lot of executives says if you want to advance in this company, you need to come to the office. So are we hurting the career situation? And now, if you know those in advance, you try to work with them. You try to do extra efforts to make sure that we have the good teamwork and we have the good collaboration and we have the engagement, and you're not out of sight and out of mind in career decisions. You can work on it if you know that that's a downside. If you don't manage it, you can work on it. So yes, we've got to make sure that doesn't become a detractor. It takes away if it doesn't work. It's going to take away from the value of what we're doing here.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to. In this particular case study that you want to read, they were concerned about engagement and customer service. Remember, these are claims processors and claims examiners. And the marketing team says, let's make sure we don't lose our customer service edge because we work with patients and we work with providers and we have good relationships there. Let's make sure we don't lose that. So they worked hard to make sure that didn't go away. In fact, their goal was to make it better with a work at home arrangement. And They did the same thing with engagement. Knowing that that's a possibility, they worked on that. Let's make sure that people are engaged, they're connected, they're involved, they're not left out, those kind of things.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. You mentioned the distractors and that can be a real benefit, that people don't have the distractions of people popping into their offices. And I just had this conversation with this engineering director we're going back and now I know I'm not going to get as much done. Right. So I hear that, but I also hear and see on the Zooms, the little children that are crawling through, the cat that's crawling across the keyboard, right? So I think to David's bringing this up, I think that is also, you got to measure the distractions on both ends of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, if we get back to some kind of normality, usually those things are taken care of through daycare or childcare.
Yeah.
We got into chaos with the school systems and daycare and childcare. Mm-hmm. This particular case study was done before the pandemic. And one of the requirements of this company was they had to be free of distractions. You cannot now convert this to childcare or elder care, or you can't even have a TV in this room. See, they required them to set aside an office in your apartment or in your house free of distractions. They would not allow a TV in there.
Yeah.
Now, I think that's not very sensitive. You can imagine now we have to be a little more sensitive with things like that when we're in the chaos environment of having to go home and the schools are shut down. and the daycares are closed and all of that stuff.
Yeah, I think that is a part of what really companies need to do now. Is just because they had a pivot and a policy that worked during a global pandemic does not mean that needs to be the way they run their remote work going forward. And
Right.
I remember 25 years ago, I was working at Verizon and they said, does anyone want to work from home? And I raised my hand. I said, yes, absolutely. I want to work from home. Well, I got this whole list, right? This is what the technology needs to do. This is what your environment needs to do. Prove to me that you have daycare for your little boy, right? Like I had to actually prove all that stuff. So I think that's going to be a balancing act. If people are saying we're going to do this now permanently going forward, what do we need to put in place? And how are we going to measure whether those things are making an impact?
Yes.
I would love to turn to talk about your case study because I thought it was really fascinating. And I loved that it was before the pandemic because this was a company that made a deliberate choice to do this. And they had a very deliberate methodology to anticipate their ROI and then to measure their ROI. And if you could take us through that a bit, and then we're all about really practical here. So if you could give some folks who are saying, oh, wow, that seems like a lot, where would someone start if they wanted to begin to measure?
Well, the key is let's decide to do a study of how well remote working is working. We don't see that so much. We get sentiments from employees about, do you want to continue to work at home or not? We got tons of those kind of surveys. And we got the interviews with executives saying, do you want the employees back to work or not? So we've got a lot of that. So we don't need that anymore. We need to know, is it working now? There's a key person to make this work in an organization, and that's the manager of the person who's working remotely or in a hybrid environment. Let's put that in the mix too. Mm-hmm. I would imagine if your first frontline manager says, hey, this is working, we're getting the work done and more, we got this under control, you'd see your top executives are not going to interfere much with that. So we got to make sure that that's working because that's the big resistor. In this particular study, the vice president of claims, where these people work, she said it's going to be resisted by the managers because they think they have to see you to get the work done. Their presence is what causes you to produce. And we all know that that's a false assumption there. So we had to work with those managers. And that's important data there because we collected, what was their attitude going into this? How do we change that? Do they see this as a viable alternative? Do they know how to make it work? So they went through some training. How do you manage remotely? And see, there's some insecurity there with the frontline manager. It says, look, if my presence is not needed, then, I manage 10 people now in a room in an office, but now remotely, I could probably manage 20 or 30. So are you going to eliminate a lot of managers now because of this? So there's some insecurities that feed into this. So we have to make sure that frontline team is on board. And I think that's missing in a lot of our data. So what we don't have is data about how it's working, because if it's not working, this data will show you where it breaks down, because it's that foundation you point out tells us, was it the reaction, they didn't want it? Is it they didn't really learn how to do this? Or is it not working very well as they're getting the work done? The collaboration, communication, and so forth is not there. So you need to do a study. And I'd say to the audience here, go to the good starting point is the Chief Human Resource Officer, and we may have some of those here. Crank up that study, get that study going about how it's working or not working. And think about 3 perspectives. You want to show the ROI to the executives. Hey, ROI is something they love. They make so many decisions on ROI. It's a credible analysis. You can make it so credible that a chief financial officer will support it. That's your key, is to make sure it's a credible analysis. You put that kind of data in the to the top executives, but then you show the ROI from the employees, not as a number. You don't necessarily need to calculate ROI, but look at these intangibles you're getting here. Look at how they see this. What's in it for them? Hey, this is going to keep people with us. keep them from leaving. A lot of experts say your big talent attractor is going to be letting people work remotely. If you don't do that, you're going to lose them. I mean, that's the way it works. So that's the employee ROI, but also think about the environment. Every CEO talks about how they help the environment. They support efforts to help the environment. Well, the environmentalists say one of the best things you can do as a company is to let your employees work remotely. Cut down on all that transportation costs, either personal or through mass transit. So cut that. You reduce that. You can actually calculate the number of tons of carbon that you're preventing to go into the environment. See, that's what they did at this particular company, calculated the tons of carbon prevented the environment. So now you're looking at the ROI for your planet, for your community, for the environment, for your traffic and congestion. So you see, if we become so congested that it becomes a detriment to the city. We've seen mayors run on platforms of trying to reduce traffic. The president of the Philippines, the number 2 item on his agenda to get elected as a president of that country was to clean up the traffic problem they have. Can you imagine that? So traffic. So just take Atlanta, Georgia, for example. This is my hometown. They've got one of the worst traffic problems in the USA. And they have 19 Fortune 500 companies based there. And so most of their employees in that city are knowledge workers. They can actually work at home, but only about 10% of them are working at home. It ought to be close to 80 and 90%. And it just makes that city so congested, no one wants to even get in the traffic. It's hurt them now. The business attractors, the business development people in the state say, we can't attract people to move our headquarters to Atlanta anymore because it's too much traffic. Mm-hmm. So we need to help that. So that's our third bucket. We look at the profits, people, and the planet.
Yeah.
And we're missing the planet connection here.
Yeah.
All of our
And the conversation we were having pre-show here, I think the impact on the environment is so important and so huge. And most CFOs are going to want to go there third after they get what is the office space savings that we're going to do. And in your case study, I was shocked by the numbers of what you want to share a little bit about the office space piece of that?
Yes. So what they did was they actually would go into your house or apartment and basically build out your room to look like your cubicle you had at work. Remember, these are claims examiners or claims processors. So they spent some money doing that and making sure all the technology is there and all security is there. So they want this to look like and function like your work office at the office. And so they did that. So they did spend some money for that. It cost them about $17,000 per person for the office. But they saved some because they charged all of that amount that for cranking this, building this out, they put all that money in the first year, and they looked at just the first year ROI. I would actually spread that build out cost over maybe a couple of years and look at a 2-year ROI. It makes the number even go up more. Mm-hmm. But they said, look, this is going to pay off huge without doing that. Just be ultra conservative and put it all in there.
Yeah.
So yes, you're looking at office expense. You also had a tremendous impact on turnover. It had a tremendous impact on productivity. And what they could do is measure. So out of about 1,000 people, they had about a third of the workforce agreed to go to this. Because as Karen, you had at Verizon, you had a list of conditions.
Yeah.
Some people didn't want to meet all those conditions. And so it's not for them. And some people just don't want to do that. They don't want to work at home. And so a third did. So we had a comparison group. What we did is match up the people so that they looked alike in terms of tenure, job with the company, its job status, performance ratings. And so we're comparing apples to apples. And so we look at their productivity. So we had experimental versus control group. Productivity improved, turnover decreased dramatically with the work at home group. And of course, office expense was given for that group as well. So huge ROI. They actually forecasted the ROI in advance because they knew this is a policy change. And the CFO says, why don't we look at a forecast? Because if this thing doesn't work, we can't reverse it very easily.
Yeah.
Can you imagine you set up these 300 plus people to work at home and you say, hey, it didn't work for us. Come back to work now.
Yeah.
You'd lose them all.
So
And so-
oh, go ahead.
No. So my point is you forecasted the ROI in advance. Then you actually calculated the post to make sure it delivered that forecast. And what happened is the forecast was higher than the actual, and that's what you want to do. So you're very conservative in your forecast, and you got a number that's believable and credible.
All right. Very, very good. I have to ask this while I have you, because we're all about micro innovation and tapping into the best ideas of every team member around here. That's what our book Courageous Cultures is about. So how do you measure innovation? And do you have a way to approach that? Are people being more or less innovative as they're working from home?
Well, I think the jury's out. I haven't seen a study on that. What we do know is the more they get engaged, the more they have innovation. But work at home can get in the way with engagement if we don't control for it. So I haven't seen that, but it could be. Innovation is something we study, and it's one of our books, as you can imagine. So we work with people implementing innovation, and this is our book, Value of Innovation. It's a John Wiley book. So what's happened with innovation is that you need this foundation to get to innovation at the end. We want innovative work inside the organization, or maybe better innovation on our products and services we offer to customers. So that's an impact that we need from innovation. But innovation typically breaks down about how people are reacting to it. Are they learning to be creative, innovative? Are they coming up with ideas and suggestions? Are they doing things that they need to do to turn into the innovation? So it's that foundation that's often missing.
Okay.
So that's our work in innovation, is to make sure it's there. So that's something that we haven't seen yet, but it could very well be. If we worked on it, we probably could make sure that innovation thrives.
Good. All right. We only have a couple minutes left, so I'm going to just leave it now with you to share any last bits of practical advice. How would you recommend someone get started who's like, oh gosh, this feels like a lot. What should I do now?
Well, it'll take some effort. We won't take long. You got to capture some data. We've been working now, so we don't have to wait for it to see how it works. We already got it. It's just a matter of collecting the right kind of data. I'd say let's get it started. You can see in this case study that we'll send to you. Just let us know, or we can do that through you, Karen, to get them a copy of the study. You can see what's involved in it. It follows the process we have behind me as we go through. Why did we do this? Of course, we went into chaos. We didn't have this plan very well. But what's our business impact that we see here? And we go right on through to see if it was actually delivered here. We start with the end in mind in the very beginning. So I'd say get the study going. If you need some help, we'll talk to you about it. Give us a call. You've got our email address, our contact possibilities here. That's jack@roinstitute.net if you want to come to us directly or through you. Whatever you want to do, we'd be happy to talk to you about this, show you some more detail, show you how it's done with some of our books, Sherry, easily break it down. It's a matter of, the point is, do something.
Yeah.
Be proactive on this. Don't let this disaster happen, because we've got Resignation Nation coming.
Yeah.
We don't want that to happen. That's not good for anyone.
Right.
And it can be prevented if we get those executives to buy into this.
All right. Well, thank you so much, very much. Jared has put up how we can find you. Encourage you to reach out to Jack, read the books. I think this is, and you don't have to do a huge ROI study to start. Pick some measurements, right? And start small.
Start small.
All right.
Then go.
All right. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate all of the value and the ROI of this conversation for our listeners today. Thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations on a great show you have.
Oh, thank you. Okay. So we're delighted that you're with us. We have a lot of great upcoming guests. So we're delighted with that. Next week, we have Jim Detert. He is talking about how to choose courage. You know, I love talking about courage and stand out competently at work and in everyday life. Then we have Sarah Kennedy coming up and talking about balancing execution with empathy. And then Shep Hyken, a customer experience expert, and talking about some of the important customer experience metrics and why they matter. So hope you will join us on an upcoming edition of Asking for a Friend.